Well, hello everyone. Have right here. I'll talk about right here of talking about understanding about whenever it comes to working on progress, right? Like talk about ticket moving forward right here, but then also you have right here talking about for good news and you got the bad news right here. And a lot of times it's like everybody else would even say too that if you're going to be having these discussions and having these meetings a lot of times that the first thing that you're going to say on air is going to probably be is as to where you start the speech by stating toward, okay, yeah, I got some good news and I got some bad news for everybody here. And so it's like, yeah, every time you do start a conversation like that, and you're always want to know too that what news do you really want to hear other than if it's not the good news for sure, you want to go ahead and is it all kind of measured by different differences in the category, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way that everybody else might say that yeah, when we are talking about the good news for sure, the good news really that it's like yeah, well, the bad news is and like the good news is, but it's like every time you do think about it, and you're always thinking too that really that people yeah, especially your audience, especially. Your audience, they're going to probably be one or two that they're going to be asking the questions a lot of times, and most of the time it's like, yeah, well, really, whenever you do, begin a speech of any way, and let's just say that, yeah, if you're waiting for your gift or something like that, but it's like every time you do think about that, and you're always one or two that yeah, that number one, I'm like, yeah. So in case if anybody were to ask, is that, what does it usually mean whenever you do give the good news or if it's the bad news to somebody? So it's like, yeah, the good news is that we have a lot more work to do. I'm like, oh yeah, so it's like every time you do think about that in 102, you have meetings talking about stuff, and it sure seems that way that yeah, well, the good news is that we have a few more resources available than what we originally started out with. But then, of course, the bad news is, it's been delayed. But, so it's like, yeah, so every time you do think about that and you want to know too, what? Like, and that's right. So when we do talk about meetings a lot of times, it's like, yeah, delayed. Delayed pretty much means, yeah, is toward it, it's not happening upon scheduled. So like let's just say that everybody else might even say that you start these conversations a lot of times, and maybe somebody's going to say is toward it yeah that delayed a lot of times. I'm like yeah, postponed and delayed, and so it's like yeah. So every time you do start a conversation like that, and let's just say that if you're going to be having your meetings talking about stuff like that, and it stays toward yeah that meaning is toward it's been delayed. We had to that our team had to postpone our agenda just because. And so it sure seems that way that you go ahead and start out that there's something like just because or something like that, and so a lot of times it's like you're always 102 that if you start out with is toward it, you go ahead and do you think anybody's gonna maybe say is toward it anything that you're gonna be working on, especially like anything that you're gonna be working on that do you think anybody's gonna be giving you more time to get something done for any reason at all, like, well, really, that just because you graduated and just because but still that but another thing I want to talk about right here, talk about for responsibilities, right? So I'll go ahead and include right here on this line right here of talking about your responsibilities, and so it's like yeah. So whenever every time and when we talk about responsibilities, right, and almost every time you do think about that, and you're always thinking as toward it, really, that what's a good way of how we call for responsibility. Is knowing that toward it, do you want to look at that just a little bit like a voice? If you want to look at responsibility maybe a little bit like a voice, or do you want to just look at that as toward it? No, it's a task actually. So it's like, yeah, so every time you do have these conversations, maybe with a parent or anybody that you talk to, and at 102, that the key responsibility would be is as to where that knowing about what the important tasks that need to be accomplished, right? So a lot of times it's like every time you do think about that, and you're always thinking as toward it, okay, yeah, your responsibility pretty much means is toward it, yeah, if it's in your name for sure, yeah, if those documents are stated in your name or something like that, or let's just say that another keyword that you want, like, yeah, and I was just thinking too that like everybody else might say that this is usually what I do also. So if I were to put the word right there, talk about right here, and if I were to put the year right here in big letters right there, so like let's just say that I don't know, like everybody else might say that is that kind of helpful whenever you do that? Whenever you do put the year, put the date on, like in big letters like that, and I'm like, yeah, for any purpose at all, why you would want to do that, but like everybody else would say that what I call, the twin 2 year. And, yeah, I call that the twin 2 year just because. I'm like, yeah, twin 2. I'm like, yeah, twin 2. The twin 2 year. And I was just thinking, too, that, you were going to, like, yeah, I wanted, like, on the subheading of a cover letter, on the cover of a magazine or something like that, you call that, the twin 2, twin 2 year. But I'll go and put right here, yeah, for twin 2 year right there. But still, that, it's like, yeah, so every time you think about working on an agenda for sure, and it sure seems that way, that, you go ahead and put the year like that, and put responsibilities like that right there. So it's like, yeah, so all this right here, yeah, for sure, you go ahead and like, let's just say that if you were to put this like on a sticky note, right? On a sticky note, or like any sort of flashcard to where it's readable, right? To make that readable, but at the same time, it sure seems that way that when we're talking about the good news and the bad news here, and it sure seems that way that, yeah, maybe everybody's going to be asking about, okay, what's the bad news? Well, I don't know if I really even want to hear what the bad news is. I don't want to hear what the bad news is. I would actually prefer to hear the good news. Well, the good news is that you're going to be able to graduate. But, of course, the bad news, of course, would be is like, yeah, everybody else might say that, so every time you do think about that, and you're 102, that yeah, there's going to be paperwork for sure that you got to work out, right? But it's like every time you do think about that, and you're always 102, that yeah, number one, yeah, it's been delayed. That yeah, the meeting time has been delayed, but in the meantime, you can look at the paperwork. So it's like, yeah. So another thing that I want to talk about right here is about in the meantime, and so like everybody else might even say that yeah, in the meantime. So in the meantime, you could be working on this, right? So it's like every time you do think about that in 102, that this next project that we're talking about right here may not have anything to do with what needs to be completed for the work, right? But a lot of times it's like, you kind of use that word and phrase so far as to where that, yeah, in the meantime, you could be working this puzzle, or in the meantime, you could be working on this, in the meantime, you could be working on that. But it's like every time you do think about that in 102, that yeah, well, whenever you first got the job, by the way, you agreed to where that you would be doing certain tasks, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way. That every time you do think about this at 102, that really, that if somebody were to tell you the good news and then compare it to the bad news here, and it's like 102 that okay, the good news versus the compared to the bad news. And I say that yeah, well, usually the good news is usually what you want to hear first, besides what the bad news is. But it's like every time you think about that in 102, that you look at the page right here, but still, all about 11, 12 pages right here. And if I say that, yeah, whenever you're going to be working a job for sure in the 102, that, about how many pages is that right there? But it's like, yeah, when we talk about responsibilities, though, so it's like, yeah, so it's like every time you do think about that, about responsibilities, right? And you're thinking as toward, okay, yeah, what's another way of how you want to describe a responsibility? You want to look at that like, yeah, resources and interest, all that, but still, if we were to actually, yeah, if I were to actually, yeah, move some, like, yeah, I can maybe move some of those around or just make that a little bit more readable right here, but still, that, a way of how you want to describe, talk about for responsibility, right? And just knowing as to where that, yeah, do you want to kind of look at that as toward, yeah, keep on record of the things that need to be accomplished, especially. So let's just say that, yeah, the records, the 300 copies plus the records. So I can just make this a little bit smaller right here and put it right here. I'll talk about for records because we all know that that whenever it comes to information that needs to be on file, right? And so that's why it seems like that every time we do speak about responsibilities. And I could put record, or if anything, that yeah, go ahead and move responsibilities over here because that's something that I'd like to discuss with everybody, right? And just knowing about what's the best ways of how to describe talk about for responsibilities. I'm like, well, responsibilities, ever since you were about maybe 10 years old, your librarian probably told you the same thing. That, yeah, whenever you do check out a book for sure, that you are responsible for returning it, right? And a lot of times it's like 102 that, yeah, that whenever it comes to checking out a book from a library or something like that, but I tell you one thing, everybody, that whenever it comes to understanding about responsibilities, a lot of times, that every time you do think about that, and you're thinking that toward, okay, yeah, well, a way of how you want to describe a responsibility is another way of how you want to cause is toward it. Are you able to overcome those expectations, right? So far as what needs to be done and how to keep it clean and how to keep everything organized and how to maintain, the basic task of what needs to be taken care of, right? So that's why it sure seems that way, that every time you do think about that in the 102, that, okay, yeah, that, every time you do think about that and you're thinking as toward it, really that whenever you first start working on something for sure, that it's like, you start working on something, but then maybe the main purpose to why you were using that tool or the main reason why you were in there in that office mainly was to produce copies. If you were trying to get copies made or something like that, but a lot of times it seems like that, the main reason why you were in that room at the beginning right there is mainly because that, you were trying to get copies made. But then it's like, yeah, there's a lot more to it than that. There's more that needs to be done. So it's like, so every time we do think about responsibilities, a lot of times it seems like that more, and so it's like, yeah. So every time you do think about that, and you're 102, that whenever I first was originally hired to do this job, I actually my responsibility, of course, was just to produce copies. I was not in charge of all this other stuff, and so that is why it seems like that, every time we do think about that, and at 102, that when we do speak about responsibilities, but it's like you're thinking as toward, okay, yeah, that, your responsibilities are basically are what you call the top task, but your special your attention or something like that. But on the other hand, that whenever we do speak about the good news and the bad news right here, and you're thinking this toward, okay, yeah, the bad news. Well, here's the bad news. The bad news is that the meeting, yeah, the process has been delayed, but we'll have to reschedule. The bad news could also be about is this toward, yeah, that a few things that you ordered are going to take a little bit longer, just to be able to be delivered. And so a lot of times it's like, yeah, so it's like whenever you do start a statement, start talking about something for sure, you're going to maybe start out with the good news first and then the bad news. But like everybody say this toward, oh, hey, we want to hear the excellent news, or we want to hear a little bit more of what you call, the all right news or something like that. But anyway, but those are the things that you talk about right here. But still, that I know with me though that whenever it comes to understanding about, whenever it comes to like you talk about for the good news and the bad news right here. But it's like, yeah. Whenever we do talk about jobs, though, but it's like, so every time we do think about that and know that, yeah, while you were waiting, that there has been a lot of updates you made to be working on. But then, of course, people say is toward, you are responsible for taking care of this. But yeah, you are responsible. You're responsible for you keeping track of these papers, including tracking when they were modified or something like that. So every time you do think about that in 102, that there's going to be wording, there's going to be wording right here, and so it's like every time you do think about that and thinking it's toward it, yeah. So every time, yeah, modified, and then just to clarify that everything, everything is all correct. And clarify that everything is all correct right there. So you got that right there, that paragraph right there. And then you have right here of talking about, yeah, your time for me mean forever. But anyway, but yeah, you got these pages right here. But still, it's like, but talking about, whenever it comes to, yeah, ticket moving forward right here. But anyway, so that's that right there. But I know with me though that whenever we're yeah, time to take a move forward right there. But other than that, it's like, yeah, talk about for the good news and then the good news and then the bad news right there. But anyway, but those are the things I just want to mention to everybody here about that. Is like you're talking about, is like talk about for a twin 2 year, and then also what is considered the good news, and what is considered the bad news. But other than that,